children, they are abducted at the age of 8 or 10 or 12 and trained, and then they fight and they die.
When I was in school, in grade 10, I was abducted. I was so scared. One of my uncles knew very well about the Nonviolent Peaceforce in Valacheni. So he advised to my mom to go to Nonviolent Peaceforce and talk about your daughter's needs so they might help you.
To sell peace is very difficult but to start a conflict is so easy. It is very demoralizing statement, but that's the facts of it.
In the last 100 years, the nature of armed conflict has changed tremendously. We are beginning to see more and more civilians, particularly women and children, suffering and dying in these very violent conflicts. From the grassroots communities to the United Nations, we're beginning to recognise that these violent conflicts will not be solved through militarism. What is being asked for now and demanded more and more are unarmed civilian peacekeepers to come into these very dangerous situations in order to give people space and confidence to begin to solve their problems.
In 1983, the wars in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador were heating up. In that year, a delegation of North Americans visited a village on the border of Honduras. People were still burying their dead, and one of the delegates asked the villagers if they thought there would be another attack. And the response came back, "They won't attack while you're here."
Unarmed civilian peacekeeping is an idea that has been tried and tested over the last quarter of a century in places like Colombia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Guatemala, and Palestine. These experiments have proved what is possible and what is still needed to really make a difference in how conflicts are handled in the world. In recent years, efforts have accelerated, focusing on increased professionalism and moving to a much larger scale. Nonviolent Peaceforce was founded in 2002. Its aim is to protect human rights, protect human life, and to help create the space needed for local people to begin to build their own bridges to peace.
A foreigner walking into a conflict now symbolizes something, a possibility of international cost, and just the whole idea that international law and human rights law in particular is somehow a moral issue. It's not just sort of political agreements. When you walk in and you're raising those issues or just representing them with your very presence, it makes people think differently about what they're doing.
I really have spent a great deal of time in the last 15 years trying to figure out why this works. Why can you go into a place where murderous people want to kill other people, and why are they likely to not do it when you're there? Let's just look at a simple model for the kind of violence that we're trying to put a stop to. You would generally have somebody's getting hurt, somebody's hurting them directly, and there's almost always someone higher up who has something to do with the decision that damage takes place. So what do we do as the international community when we see these big human rights abuses and we want to do something about it? Well, usually we set in motion international pressure on some level that is directed at the top of this picture. Our UN security resolutions, our big international reports on human rights abuses are aimed at a government or at the top of the picture. Now, why is it different when we put a whole lot of us on the ground? You're close to where the violence is happening. Once you have international personnel on the ground, there's almost always more international concern about the situation. And most important, you actually have the capacity to interact with people all the way down the chain of command because, first of all, you can figure out what the chain of command is. You can start to see who actually is calling the shots and having control, and you can start to go talk to them. And you start to actually be able to transmit from the international level down to the local level because you're there and you know how to make that transmission of concern happen.
Ultimately, governments and the United Nations need to recognise the value of unarmed civilian peacekeeping as a necessary policy option.
More and more, even the UN is beginning to work with other partners. They see that they alone cannot do everything that needs to be done, so partnerships are being developed more and more.
By using unarmed civilians working at the grassroots level, NP is able to gain the trust of local communities, and by maintaining its strict non-partisan stance, it is able to gain the trust of governments and armed groups who could do them harm.
Civilian peacekeepers have been able to have an impact in protecting civilians, in protecting people who are having to flee the guns as they approach their villages, but more importantly, to do prevention so that people don't have to flee in the first place.
This work requires real diplomacy, communication skills, and cultural sensitivity. Since 1983, there has been on and off civil war in Sri Lanka. In February 2002, a ceasefire agreement was signed by the Sri Lankan government and the Tamil Tigers, and people saw an opportunity for peace. Unfortunately, neither side was sufficiently committed to the peace process for it to hold, and by January 2008, the ceasefire agreement had collapsed completely.
And there have been situations where even international NGOs, they left the place, and it was extremely dangerous to stay put there. But our teams, Nonviolent Peaceforce teams, they didn't leave the community, no. This created great confidence among the local population that they stand with us.
Our role in Jaffna is to instill confidence, show the community that in a way you are not alone.
We are working a lot with families and vulnerable individuals, and we support the work of local human rights defenders.
The advantage that we bring, the fact that we are able to build long-standing relationships and to really understand firsthand what's happening.
The suffering that these people have gone through is in no way justifiable by any side. We do not strive to judge. We are just here to try and ensure that civilians are not as affected by violent conflict.
We can be really close to where the violence happened, to the people that are directly victim of violence. We can accompany people, we can move them around in order to protect them.
In areas where conflicts have persisted for many years, one of the most difficult challenges civilian peacekeepers face is overcoming a culture of silence.
Took us a long time, 2-3 years, to get the confidence of the people we're working with.
People will not freely share information because they are always afraid what they say will be misconstrued by the other side. Any little spark, anything, any little incident can immediately spread out to the whole district, even to the whole east.
Last month we had a problem, and myself and the people of the Nonviolent Peaceforce, we went there and we are able to reduce the tension in that place.
We are not taking any side of any groups or any community. That's why it's very important our role at that meeting. So we organize roundtable meetings, involvement of Tamil, Muslim, even security forces who are responsible for the security of the civilians.
There are Tamil, Muslims and Sinhalese. These are the three communities living here. So these three communities are trust with the NP because they have done their good job in the past.
They are in the forefront to organize peace meetings between the Tamils and Muslims, inviting religious and civil society leaders in the area to reduce the tension between the communities.